Hello and welcome to the gallery. My name is Jon and today we'll be painting some vampires-ish. So we're starting our journey into Cursed City, and we'll be starting with the vampires and thereabout related monsters. This video will be in 3 steps, the batswarms, the vampires, and the big beastie boy. Let's just start with the batswarms. Now let's start out really simple. I'm starting out with Vyrkos purple contrast paint just over a zenithal undercoat. This zenithal undercoat is linked in this video right here, and I'm using some sort of pinkish hue underneath the actual white zenithal. Just gives it a little bit of extra flavor, a little bit of extra flair, which I kind of dig. And I'm using the same basic undercoat for the entire model line in this video, because I wanted to have some sort of cohesive whole, one model to the next, and the color scheme is pretty similar all around in this case. Next I'm using Drucci Violet, and I'm just going over the membrane of the wings, just getting a little bit of different color variation here and there, so it looks somewhat more interesting. And I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm not going to go overboard with highlighting or recess shading or anything like that. Just getting it ready for the tabletop so it looks good enough. I'm not going for anything over the top. It's just good enough. If I was going for a display model, I would go a hell of a lot further. Finally, we're using palette witch flesh and just dry brushing that a little bit over the front bit of the model and a little bit on the chest and stuff like that, getting some extra look to it. Now this was fairly quick and fairly easy, but the next bit will be a little bit more complicated, but not really. We're going for quick and easy here. Next is Vyrkos Bloodborne, the vampire guys from the box set. Again, we're starting out with Vyrkos purple over the same zenithal undercoat as previously. The only difference is now I'm mixing it 50-50 with contrast medium, and with this mixture we get this really pale desaturated pinkish hue to the skin, and I really dig that. It looks like an exposed muscle, sort of. A little bit of a dehydrated exposed muscle. It looks raw and it looks somewhat visceral and a little bit bright, which is a fun mixture, and I decided to go with it since I liked how it came out. Main thing is to be careful when you're brushing it on, not to skip any places, because even though it is quite a pale translucent paint, you will see if you are missing some bits. After that, I'm going over the talons and the claws, well, his hands, claws, with a little bit of Drucci Violet, and then feathering it out once it reaches the ankle or the elbow, just to get a little bit of a more worn, strained look to these particular places of his body. And I think it sells the effect of something that is filled with power, because it looks like it's trying to restrain itself almost imperceptibly. After that, I'm putting a little bit of Nuln Oil just on the very tips of the legs and the hands, and feathering it out again. Just gives it a little bit of a darker hue and looks a little bit nicer, to be honest. Well, in my opinion at least, and in this case that's the only opinion that matters. It's your own opinion for your own models. Everybody else can say what they want, but your opinion of what you like is what you like. Next, I'm using Reichland Flesh Shade, and I'm going over the fur of the model just to tint it in a different way. Once the fur reaches a little bit closer to the actual skin, I'm moistening or dampening my brush a little bit and feathering it out again, so it just mixes together a little bit better, so there's no striking line between the furry bits and the exposed skin. I know the brown looks a little bit off place there, but I still kind of like it. Into the mouth, just a drop of a lupus pink, just to give the hint of this powerful bite that's filled with blood. And then eyes, and my god, I hate painting these small eyes. I have to really start trying to practice more with eyes, but this guy has eyes, so a little bit of yellow into the eyes otherworldly look. It's demonic yellow, so it looks a little bit interesting. Next, it's for the armor, and usually I would not like to paint darker contrast paints over lighter contrast paints, but a little bit of paint on the brush and just dab it on, and be careful where you're putting it, and you should be fine. This is a Black Templar contrast paint, and I wanted the armor to have this darker look because the rest of the model is so pale, so I wanted something that, well, contrasts to that. A little bit on the belt as well. This was nerve-wracking because we have this great white chest piece right next to it, and if the black would go out of hand, I would have to start over again a little bit in that place. But once all the black was done, it was time to move on to something a little bit more interesting in my opinion, and that's giving this model a little bit of color, some powerful color. So really striking red hair goes well with the vampire blood theme, so I used Flesh Terror's red, which is quite the red color, and of course the hair has this little bit of sentinel in the folds, so it became even nicer due to that. Now really striking red hair kind of looks cool on this guy. It gives him more of a oomph thing to him. A little bit of metallics, and we're almost there. Some gold on the hilt and the pommel, and on the buckles on the chest armor, and on the weird things that are going out of the weird thing in the back. Just to give it some cool look and something that offsets all the blackness that is there. After we've done with all the gold, a little bit of Runefang steel, which is a bright steel color, and we're putting that just on the sword. But no need to put it anywhere else, because the sword will stand out a little bit, because, well, it physically stands out quite a lot. Now we're not doing anything fancy with shading and recess shading and then dry brushing or something to get some extra highlights. We're just being careful where we shade. And I'm using Cryptek Armor Shade, and we're going over the gold bits and a little bit close to the hilt of the sword, and then just dragging it up so it's darker near the hilt, but the tip stays shiny. Now we've done the batswarms, we've done the Vyrkos Bloodborne, the vampire guys. Now let's do the big beast, the Vargskyr, and finish this video off on a grand note. While I have you, underneath there are the buttons, you know them, the like, the share, the subscribe, the bell. Please press them, it helps a hell of a lot. That is to say, if you want to press them. Funnily enough, the main guy of this video is also quite a lot less complicated than the vampires. I mean, he's a lot bigger, but he's still a lot less complicated. We're starting out with the same skin tone, just brush it on, and as you can see, looks pretty okay on this guy. Then we're continuing with the same theme. We're using Druchii Violet on the legs, around the talons, and on the hands, and we're just doing the same thing. We're putting it up and feathering it down a little bit. It's quite simple. Then, like we did with the actual bats, into the wings and into these weird shoulder blade things, and around the horns and around the eyes, I'm putting some Druchii Violet, just to give it a little bit of a darker look, so it looks a little bit more interesting and less flat, because he's quite a big guy, and if you have only the one undercoat, even though it is a contrast undercoat with shades and highlights and everything like that, looks a little bit flat. So we're exposing him a little bit more with this purple strained look here and there. And afterwards I'm using Nuln Oil, like I did with the vampires, around the feet and the claws, and we're just dragging that up. I didn't really think about painting the actual claws or the nails, because I knew I would paint over the tip of the nails with blood and you would barely see them, and around the legs it was all these undercoats with a lot of black over it, and it looked kind of good actually. Next, same as the vampires, we're using Reikland Flesh Shade, and we're putting that on the fur bits and dragging it out and feathering it out, so it looks all like it's the same thing. It doesn't transition on a sharp line or something like that. And of course he has a lot more fur, so we can have a little bit more fun with it. You can have it in a little bit of stripes, splotchy bits or something like that. I just went simple and just put it on him and then just feathered it out a little bit. Main thing is to remember to feather it quite quickly, otherwise it will dry and it will leave this kind of coffee stain look. Next I'm using palette witch flesh and I'm dry brushing the bits that are facing more upward, like the top of his legs, his shoulder blades, his elbows, his face and his neck that is pulsing on the side of his face. Also a little bit on his hands and on his feet, just to give it a little bit of extra depth. It looks kind of nice, if I say so myself. And of course you can always put a little bit of a little bit of dry brushing as well on the fur, and it'll all mix better together and it'll look like more of a cohesive whole. And that's what I want with my models, like they look natural, even though I'm not spending too much time on them or spending too much effort on them, just getting them to look kind of natural looking. Well, it was pink into his mouth as well, just to get that moist mouth look going. We will add some blood to this guy later on because my idea when I am painting models, I like to put the blood as last when I finish the base and everything. Again, with the eyes, I'm not a fan of eyes, but this guy had a little bit of bigger eyes than the vampires, but not a lot bigger, so steady hand and just trying my best here. It's all we can do. And after that, he's finished. Now let's work on the bases of the models. I'm using this vampire guy as the main subject because he has a lot of stuff going on the base, and I will be painting the bases in the same way for every single model in the Cursed City box, mainly because I want a running theme throughout the set, and simplicity is key here. So we're starting out with Basilicanum Grey on all the rock bits, be it rocks on the ground, pillars, whatever. Next I'm using a Cygor Brown on all the wood, the vines, the rats if we have them, and all the bits like that. Simple stuff just to get colors down there, and it's kind of a fun contrast with the pale guys, in this case at least. Next, for all candles, bones, skulls, whatever, I'm using Skeleton Horde. And even though the candle is on the skull in this case, I don't really care overly too much. You could shade it in a different way or something like that, but in this case I just wanted to get colors down and you can still see what it is, so it looks fine. Runefang Steel on all the silver bit or the metallic bits. I'm not going for different metallic colors like gold or silver or something like that, just getting colors down. We want bases on them, so they have to look a little bit nice. Then Cryptek Armor Shade, which I kind of love the shade after I bought it. It's a fun shade. And I'm putting that over all the silver bits and it gives it an old look. Next is just brown battleground from Army Painter on the bases. I just put a little bit of glue on the bottom, then I put this on, and you have to wipe off a little bit if it goes on the rim or something like that. Reason why I'm using this as the base material is because there was nothing else available in the local hobby store when I was buying it. Therefore I used this. Then thinned out glue, I brush that or dab that over the top so it will get a little bit more glue seeped into it and will stick even better to the base. After this has all dried, because I didn't really want this brown color on the base, but I had no other options really, I go over it with Space Wolves Grey, thinned with contrast medium, and it gives this brown color a little bit of a sicker, grayer texture, so it looks a little bit more, well, in the night, and it looks a little bit darker and a little bit more interesting and fitting with the theme of the models. After that has dried, now it's just the time to add a little bit of extra look to it, because even though it's quick, we want it to look nice. So Deadland Tufts, just stick them randomly here and there, hide any mistakes you feel like you made, you can always do that. And once this is ready, now we're working on the final bit that I always use last, and that's adding blood effects. Even though it's on the model and not on the base, I like to add blood after everything is done, because Like you see here, I'm putting a little bit on the sword, and while I'm doing that, I'm thinking, where could this have dripped? What did he slice? Where did the blood end? So after I've put on the sword, I start putting it a little bit on the ground and on the tufts and here and there where it looks a little bit more fun. Main thing here is not to go overboard. Too much is too much. And here we have them. They're quite simple to paint in this fashion, not spending too much time on any model, and they look decent enough for the table actually, in my opinion at least. Thank you very much for joining me here today. There are links in the description for all kinds of stuff. Social media and various tidbits. You do with it what you will. Like, share, subscribe, hit that little bell thing, and let the colors flow. But until next time, farewell.